All right, so I guess welcome back to week 2. So what we're going to look at today is we're going to kind of do a little bit of review of just PHP, SQL, how do we kind of build dynamic web pages. So what I wanted to start off with was just kind of an overview again from the web that we talked about last week. So just as a refresher, if you're not super familiar with this or you forgot. So we have a browser. We're going to make an HTTP request, and that's kind of these lines here, to a server, and the server will kind of delegate to process any PHP file. So hand it off to PHP. PHP will do the thing that talks to the database using that SQL language. So SQL stands for Structured Query Language. So whether it's collecting information or reading information from a database, writing, updating, or deleting, and then passing that back down. Back down to the browser. So your browser will never see PHP code. Your browser will only ever see HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. So the HTML that is going to be built on the server. So we're going to kind of get information from a database, build that HTML from that database information, and then ship it down to the browser. So just kind of always keep that in mind. So if you want to go ahead and just create a folder somewhere on your computer, it doesn't really matter where. If you want to put it inside like your ITP 405 folder, create a folder. I called mine week 2-PDO. You can kind of label it whatever you want. And then go ahead and download the database. And so you can get access to the database. There's a link under week 2, sample SQLite database. When you click that, it'll take you to this web page. And then scroll down a little bit and you'll see a download SQLite sample database. It'll give you a zip file, so you'll have to unzip it, but once you unzip it, it'll be this single file.
What did you call yours?
What I called the folder?
Yeah.
I just called mine week 2-PDO. And so the type of database that you're downloading, it's called SQLite. It's like a single file. And the reason why I'm kind of using it for this class, everybody can have their own instance of the database. You can mess it up. It doesn't really matter because you can just easily re-download it. And there's no like it's not hosted on a server anywhere, which just makes it really easy to manage in this class. And then this database also comes with a lot of tables and a lot of data. So it's complex enough for you to experiment around with. And if you want, you can also download the database diagram. So if you click this, it'll essentially open up a PDF if you want to save this as well. Or you can just visit that web page. I think the web page, though, kind of cuts off for some of these tables. Like it says 7 more columns, so it doesn't show all the columns. So this, well, looks like this too, does too, actually. So.
Is it supposed to be in zip format when you download it?
Unzip it, and then you'll see this file in there. And then if you want to go ahead and also open up Terminal and then CD into that folder that you just created. And so if I do an ls, so list out all the contents of this current directory, it'll just say that database. So hopefully you got to that point. Now this is a SQLite database. Mac's already come installed with SQLite, so you can easily run it. If you're on Windows, you're probably going to have to download SQLite somewhere. So you just might have to Google around, but it's not necessary for today. It's more, we're going to start off by just writing some SQL commands directly against the database, and then we're going to write PHP files that execute the SQL. So if you want, you can just kind of watch. If you're on Windows, you can just watch at least for the just the interacting with the database directly part. And then later, if you want, you can download SQLite. I can try and help you with that. But you don't need SQLite in order for PHP to execute it. Oops. Okay, so if you're on a Mac, you can open up, or you can kind of get into this database by typing in SQLite. It's SQLite, I think, version 3, so I think that's just what comes installed. And then the name of the database, so I'm not even sure how to pronounce this, but Chinook. And so here we can actually execute any type of SQL command. So if we look at the schema here, so if we can see there's a genres table. We can do select all from genres, and I'll say limit 5, so I only get back 5 rows. And you have to end it with a semicolon. It'll show you all those that data. Now it'd be nice if it showed the columns. So to turn this on, I put a little cheat sheet also on this week's set of links. So SQLite cheat sheet. And there's a couple things we can do. So there's this mode column. So if I type in, I just copy and pasted this mode column. And I re-execute that. It'll kind of split this out into separate columns, but I still don't have the headers. Now to turn on headers, there's also headers on. So you can go ahead and copy that. And this is just for formatting as I'm interacting with SQLite directly. So if I say headers or dot headers on, and then say select all from genres, you can see, okay, now it's showing the column names. Yeah, so there's a few different commands that you can use to interact with SQLite. So there's like .exit. You can change the width of the columns with .width. So you can kind of check this out. There's a command called .tables if you just want to say, show me all the tables in this database. But I think that's good enough for now. Is this big enough? Can you guys read this? You can see this? Okay, let me know if you guys want me to, increase font size or whatever. Okay, so let's get a little bit more complicated. So what I wanted to review was join. So how do we kind of pull data from one table and then join it with other data from other tables? So for example, if I want to pull all tracks, but with their associated genre, we can see that there's a relationship between these two tables. If we look at the tracks table, there's this genre ID column, and this is called, does anyone remember what this is called? Yeah, the foreign key. So it's the foreign key, and does anyone remember what this one is called? Primary key, yeah. So these two are kind of the link between these two sets of tables. So I can join these two together in order to pull a set of data that contains both tracks and the associated genres. Okay, so let's write this SQL query to pull this data. Okay, so we can start off. So we can say select. Let's do. Okay, so I'm going to say select tracks.name and genres.name. So I just want to pull each of these columns. And we could re-alias this. We could say select tracks.name as maybe we'll call it track name. And we can alias genres.name to as genre name. So we'll say from tracks. Some people like to uppercase it, so you can do that as well. It's not required. Maybe I should have just for readability. Now I want to link these two tables together. So there's a couple ways we can actually do this. One way is we can use this keyword or this set of keywords called, this is not going to work too well. All right, let me actually type it out inside Atom, and then we'll just paste it over there. Okay. So I'll just start over. Select tracks.name as track name, and then genres.name as genre name from tracks. And then in order to kind of link these two tables together, we're going to link that foreign key and the primary key together, since they're it's kind of like a lookup. And so we can say inner join on the genres table, and the condition is when tracks.genreid is equal to genres.genreid. And just so we don't get back so many, I'll just say limit 5. Okay, so let's copy this and I'll execute it over here. All right, so and then looks like my settings got wiped when I terminated. But okay, so we can see the data, we can see the track name, and then the corresponding genre. So let me turn this back on. So I'll see headers on what was it? Mode column. Okay, there we go. Any questions? Yeah.
I guess for people who have Windows, did SQLite 3 like work for anyone?
Oh yeah. It's not going to work on Windows because it doesn't come installed, so you'll have to find SQLite. But that's okay if you want to just like watch during this portion, because we're not going to do this for long, and then we're going to have PHP execute this, so you won't need it. But yeah, if you want to mess around later, you'll have to find out how to download it. So how many people took ITP 300? Okay, a couple people. So there's another way you may have seen this written, and so it may have looked like this. So we could actually write this where we say select the same thing from, and then we could say from tracks and genres, and we can just say where tracks.genre ID equals genres.genre ID. That's another way we could have written it. It's kind of up to you how you like it. Some people like this because it's a little bit maybe more explicit that we're saying, hey, we're joining tables, because sometimes this can get mixed up with your other where conditions or your other where clauses. So, it's kind of up to you, but just FYI, there's like two approaches to kind of doing these lookups. All right, so if I were to copy this and run this, oh, I forgot the limit, but yeah, you get all the data. Okay, so let's do one that's a little bit more complicated. So we're going to select all tracks. So we're going to get the track name. Then we'll look up the corresponding album title. And then we'll also look up the corresponding artist ID. So we can see that there's a relationship between tracks and albums. And we have the foreign key, album ID. Here's the primary key in the albums table. And then we can look up the associated artist for that album. Okay, so this would look like, we'll say select tracks.name as track name. I'll try and do this all in, actually let me move this to the top. Okay, so we're going to select the track name. We're also going to select the title. So we'll say albums.title as album title. And then we want maybe the artist name. So we'll say artist.name as artist. I mean, I guess we could even just simplify it where it's track album. This might be simpler. Anyone want to take a stab at the join clause? Yeah, go for it.
Inner join albums, artists.
Inner join albums. Yep. Oh yeah, to do the multiple join. Yeah. So we actually need they have to be individual per join. Yeah. So inner join albums. Perfect.
Where let's see, tracks.album ID equals albums.album ID.
Yep. Perfect. Nice. And then with this, we can actually do another join. So we can say inner join artists, and we'll say on albums.artist ID is equal to artist.artist ID. So we're doing another lookup from the lookup. Yep.
Could you use left join as well, or is that a separate thing?
Yeah, you could use that as well. Yeah. Yes.
Are you making like two separate tables? Because I thought you had to join both of them to the same one in both join?
Um,
Like if tracks is with albums, I thought it had to be tracks with artists as well.
oh, in this case, like if we look at the diagram, we can see that the relationship is tracks to albums, but then the relationship is albums to artists. There is no relationship between tracks and artists.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But if this had something like artist ID, then there would be, but at least in this database, there is no relationship between those two tables.
Oh.
Do you have to use a from statement?
Oh, yes. I forgot that. Thanks. I forgot about the main table from tracks. Okay, so then I'll say, let's see, let's just do limit 5. And I'll copy and paste this. And then we can run this. Okay, so we can see track, album, and artist. And so you can change the limit and stuff if you want, but any questions? Yes.
Show the result.
Oh, yeah.
It's kind of weird, like the format.
Oh, go back to here, the cheat sheet. One sec. And I think it's probably these two. Run the mode column and headers on.
Oh.
Yeah, to change the settings. Okay, so let's go ahead and run these from PHP now. So you can mess around with this database. It's really good just kind of practicing SQL commands. They come up in a lot of interviews too, so this is a pretty good database because there's a lot of relationships, there's lots of data, and so it's good to mess with. Okay, so I'm going to open up this folder with Atom. So whatever editor you want to use, doesn't really matter. I'll save this file in here just if you guys want to check it out later once I post this code. Okay, so let's start by creating a new file. We'll call this index.php. And let me type out the HTML document structure, and then I'll paste it in Slack so you can copy it. So this way you don't have to like type out all this stuff. So I'm just gonna quickly do this. All right, and I'm also gonna throw in Bootstrap, so because we're gonna create a table of records, and this way it won't look so bad. Okay, so you can go ahead and copy that from Slack. All right, so let's start off by making a connection to the database. So I'm going to create some PHP tags up top. And in previous classes, you may have learned about like the MySQL functions, so like MySQLi or MySQL Connect, like any of those. And that's kind of one way to interface with, to interface with the MySQL database. Now, we're using SQLite, which is a slightly different database, and there may actually be like SQLite specific functions in PHP. I'm not really sure, but we're going to use a class called PDO, and it stands for PHP Data Objects, and it's a class that's used to interface with pretty much any database. So if you're going to swap between like MySQL and SQLite or SQL Server, you can still use that same PDO class, and hopefully most of your code won't have to change. And all you would have to change is like the connection type, is changing it to SQLite or MySQL. A lot of these frameworks actually use this PDO class behind the scenes for their database connectivity. So it's good just to know kind of like what's going on under the hood for when we get into Laravel. We are going to be using this PDO, just not directly. It's using it underneath a lot of in their database library. And it's also a great way to look at an intro to object-oriented programming if that's still new to you. So what we can do is we can create this variable called PDO, and we're going to instantiate the PDO class. And so this takes a connection for SQLite. We say SQLite : and then the name of the database. All right, so we made this connection to our database. Let's write just a really simple SQL string. And so I'll say select, let's actually go back to here. All right, we're gonna select from invoices, but we're just gonna select the invoice ID and the invoice date for now. Or actually, we'll just do the invoice date. So we'll say invoices.invoice date from invoices. Okay, so we have our SQL command, so the way PDO works is we create this thing called a prepared statement, and it kind of looks like this, where we say statement is equal to, and we use this PDO class, or this PDO object now, and we can access a method on there called prepare, and we can say, let's prepare this SQL, and this will make a little bit more sense, but we're essentially preparing the SQL for user input to be passed into it. We don't have any user input yet, but we will kind of as we build this out. And so with this, we can say, we'll execute the statement. So we can call a method called execute. And so if you're coming from any other language, PHP uses like an arrow to access methods and properties and stuff. In JavaScript or other languages, it's probably dot notation. So we prepare this statement, and this will kind of like prepare it for user input, and then we execute it, and then we can collect all the results. So we can collect all the invoices by saying statement fetch all. And for now, let me just do, I'm going to do a var dump. So we'll just kind of print this out to the screen. So I'll print out invoices. And then we'll just end the execution of the page by calling die. These just built-in functions in PHP. Yep.
You have to add a semicolon in the.
You actually don't. I don't think you need this here. Yeah, just when you're kind of interacting directly in SQLite. So let's go ahead and run this. So I'm going to open up another tab in my terminal, and I'm going to cd into my school stuff. Okay, so I'm in my folder. So like we learned last week, we can start up a PHP server directly in this folder by running PHP space -S, which stands for server, and we'll say localhost 4000. And so it's going to hang there because it has a server that's just kind of waiting for requests. I could paste this in the chat too. And so we head over to the browser, go ahead and type in localhost 4000 or :4000, then we'll navigate to index.php. Well, I think actually you don't even need the index because that's served automatically by default. Yep. So if you got this, hopefully you saw some results on the screen. We only pulled the invoice date, so that's all we're seeing. But at least you made a connection, you got some data, and we dumped it out to the screen. Okay, so let's work with this data a little bit. So I'm going to comment out the var dump. And let's just print out the first invoice date. So we can say echo invoices, and let me pick, and then we'll pick off the first one. And then we could, and so the set of results that we get back, it's an array of arrays. So each row in the database comes back as an array. And so we have a list of them, so each record is an array. And so we can access each of these keys like this. So this one's called invoice date. So it should, if we say echo invoices 0, get the first one, and then access the key invoice date, this should print that first value. So let me open this up in another tab. Okay, and we can see this was the first one, so 1/1/2009. So it is printing out that first one. So this is how we kind of get access to it. So what we could do is loop over this array of invoices and then print out whatever fields that we asked for from the database. Now this syntax is kind of, I mean, it's annoying typing these like brackets and quotes and stuff. And what a lot of frameworks actually do is convert each row from the database that we get back into an object as opposed to an array. So we have an array right now, but we could have it so that these things are objects. And the way we can do that in PHP is we can say, I'll copy this statement up here, is we can say into that fetch all method that we're calling, we can pass it a constant. And so we can say PDO : fetch obj. And so this is like a constant on this class, and it's a configuration that we're passing into this fetch all method that's going to say, hey, convert this stuff into objects. So now what I should get back is, we'll say invoices. We can pick off the first one, but then at that point we can call each thing, each column will become a property on an object. So we can say invoice date. So I'll comment out these other ones. And so this is probably the more common approach that you'll see. One in at least in Laravel when we look at it, but pretty much any like MVC framework that has some kind of database library, it usually comes back as a list of objects, as opposed to like in a list of other arrays. So if I refresh this, same value. And what I can even do here is actually just do a var dump on invoices, so we can see kind of that we are getting back a bunch of objects. And refresh this, and you can see, okay, now it's an array of objects. And so we can access properties and methods off of objects using this arrow syntax. Yeah.
What does it mean with saying call to another function execute on boolean? That's the error in line 8. Is it some typo or?
Oh. Do you have maybe a syntax error in your SQL? Yeah, usually if you get that error, it's yeah, it's probably a syntax thing in the SQL. Any questions? Okay, so I'm gonna delete this. You don't need this. Well, actually, I'm gonna delete the commented stuff. Okay, so we have this data. Now let's just kind of loop over it and spit it out in our HTML. So I'm going to create a table. So just an HTML table. We'll have, all right, let's do tr. Well, this will be kind of like the header. And we'll display a few different things. So we're going to have one for the date. Let me actually change this to ths. So these will be table headers. So we'll have a date, a total. So we're going to pull all these invoices. We'll have the invoice date, the invoice total, the name, and then the email of the person. And actually, maybe instead of name, we'll just say customer name. Or maybe even just customer. It's fine. Okay, so now I want to kind of loop over this stuff. So I'm going to create, we're going to use a for each loop. And so I'm going to say for each invoices as invoice. Now there's this nice kind of like shorthand syntax that we can do in PHP. It's actually called like, I think the shorthand syntax, but you can say give it the expression and then colon, meaning we're not finished yet. And then we can put HTML here. And then we can end the for each by doing this. And this works for like if statements and other types of like control statements in PHP. And it's nice because maybe if you took 300 or another class and you learned that you had to echo out HTML and put HTML in these echo statements, it was super messy. At least here now we can write just regular HTML without nesting it inside an echo statement. But if you never learned about that, then just go with this. Okay, so our first one's going to be the invoice date. And I can say PHP echo, and we're going to say invoice arrow invoice date. And I'll just kind of make empty cells for these other columns. Let's see, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So we're looping over that array of objects, and then we can point to each property. So we only ask for invoice date, so that's what we're echoing out to the screen. Okay, so if we refresh. Okay, so I think my table is messed up. Let me look at my... Oh, let's see. I forgot the TR. Okay, so wrap this in a TR. So the table row. Okay, so for each row we want a table row. That's why this table looks a little messed up. Okay. Now I pulled in Bootstrap, so just to make this a little bit better, so if we just add the class of table to this, it'll just magically look way nicer. So any questions up until this point? Yep. Up here?
Can you say things from the PDO and put them on the last line of the PHP invoices data page fetch all from the
Oh, this thing? Yeah, without this, we got back an array of arrays, so each record in the database came back as like an array, and so this said make it an array of objects. So a slight difference, just because in PHP, right, we can either have one record be represented by an array or an object. I mean, both would functionally work. I would say it's more common you'll see it as objects, and it's just maybe a little less to type too. So, and so that's what this configuration does. So this is like a constant on the PDO class, and we're just passing this in, and then fetch all will use it and turn it into objects. Okay, so let's pull the total now. Okay, so if we look at the invoices table, the total is, let's see, where's the total? Oh, I think it's actually in the invoices table. So if I kind of go back to this and do, I'll have to look at the cheat sheet. Let's see. Oh, actually, I'll just do select all from invoices limit 1. Okay, so it's a little, I mean, there's a lot of columns here, but we can see that there's a total column. So let's go ahead and pull this too. So I'm going to say invoices.total. And so because we pulled this, now we can kind of go back to our table. And that's the second column that we'll have. So I'll say PHP echo invoice arrow total. we can go back and refresh, and we can see we get the total amounts. Okay, so the next one is the customer. So this will be the customer name. So if we look at the database schema, we can see that there's a relationship between invoices and customers, and so the foreign key is customer ID. And so we can link these two together and then pull off the first name and last name. So we can go back to our SQL statement, and let me kind of break this out onto multiple lines. So I'll say, so I'm going to say customers.firstname and customers.lastname. And then we're going to do that join here. So anyone want to take a stab at this? Yeah, I'll put this one up. Yeah. So we're pulling from the invoices table.
Oh, okay. Oh, so it's in your join. Oh, so we didn't. So we get rid of no. Inner join customers.
Yeah. Yep.
And then on invoices, customer ID equals customers.
Yep. Perfect. So we're linking up this foreign key in the invoices table. So customer ID is the foreign key, and then with the primary key from the customers table. So we'll join those two together. And now we could spit these out. So you can go to our TD, and then we could say PHP echo invoice first name, and then we'll just do echo invoice last name. You could actually put this in one single statement, so if you wanted to, you could say like, we'll concatenate these two with a space in between. So maybe that's a little bit better, actually. It's a little long for one line, but let me see what I can do. Yeah, it looks okay, I guess. Okay, so you can see the name being displayed. Okay, so one last property. So it's the email. So the email is inside also the customers table. So this one's actually, since we've already done the join now, all we have to do is say customers.email. So we just ask for this other column, and then we'll kind of, you don't have to do, we already did the join. We can go down here and we'll just say PHP echo invoice arrow email. So we echoed out the email, and all we did was add this to the column in the select statement. All right, so any questions? Yep.
Can we go back to this?
Sure. So as an exercise later, if you want to do it, you can, or if we have time later, you can actually try pulling more data by linking or by looking up or joining with the employees table and pulling information from there, just because there's a relationship between customers and employees. But we won't do that now. Let's make this a little bit more interactive instead of just kind of pulling data, or pulling just this data and then just rendering it on the screen. Let's add like a search bar to this. So kind of above the table, I'm going to add a form. And so this is going to submit to itself. So we're going to type in something into this. We're going to have an input. We're going to type in maybe like a name. And then we're going to take that name and resubmit the page, and then use that thing that was typed in the input to constrain the query. So we're going to submit to itself. So we'll say the action is index.php, and then the method is we're going to use the get method. So we're going to take the data from what we type into the input and append it to a query string. So then this way on the next page load, it'll be we'll know which like what the user had typed in. Okay, so I'm going to type in, we'll create an input. And so we'll give this a name of search. And then right below it, we'll create a submit button. So a button of type submit. And we'll have a button that just says search. Yeah, I can actually paste this too, and should have done this earlier. Okay, so if we go back and I hit search, you can see that a query string gets appended to the URL. And so if I were to type in something like, let's see, what should we search by? Maybe email. So I'll copy out one of these emails. I'll say search. And we can see that the email gets appended to the search query string parameter. So it's not actually doing the searching yet, but we can see that when this page loads again, we can take this value from the query string and then use it in our SQL query to filter down the results that we pulled from the database. Yep.
Could you upload the index.php value?
Sure, yeah. Maybe what I should do is actually create just another channel. Does everybody actually see this when I created it? Oh, you have to add it? Okay. I'll just pop in like all the code into here, so then this way the main one doesn't get all noisy. Yeah, so there's kind of my file as of now. Okay, so this is called the query string. So any variables in the URL after that question mark is the query string. And so we're going to pull this query string variable search, and if it exists, we're going to use it to filter down the results. But if it does not exist, like if we had visited just index.php, kind of like this, then we're just going to show all results. Okay, so right after the SQL statement, I'm first going to check to see if this thing exists. So I'm going to say there's a function called isSet, and we can say, let's check to see if this search query string parameter exists, or if it has been set. And so if it has been set, then I'm going to alter this SQL statement. So this, for those who are unfamiliar, $._get will allows you to pull query string data. So the value for search would be, in this case, would be the email that I typed in. And so here I'm going to say SQL is equal to SQL dot, and I'm going to modify this query string. So I'll say where what should we search by? Maybe we should search by name. All right, let's just search by name actually. So I'll say where customers dot first name. Actually, you know what? Let's do email. So we're going to say where customers dot email equals to, and then question mark. And so this is going to be a placeholder. So most often, at least when a lot of people learn basic PHP, you kind of concatenate a string of SQL and then execute that. But that's generally not secure, because you can take user input and it could manipulate that SQL query. And then if you've ever heard of like SQL injection attacks, it's very common, probably one of the most common attacks against web applications. So if you start just concatenating like user input with a SQL string and execute that SQL string against the database, you can do malicious things. So like you may have heard of people going into like some e-commerce site and they type in something crafty and like an input in the search box, and they did something like semicolon drop database, and then they could like take down the entire database. It's not that easy, because they get really clever with these things, but it's possible. So if like in the news, you'll see it. You'll hear about it like all the time, unfortunately. So kind of the fix around this is to at least in PHP, is to use what's called prepared statements. And so we're going to kind of let this PDO class do all the hard work, instead of us like concatenating all these user input with the SQL string and then executing it. We're going to use this PHP class to use this prepared statement, and it kind of takes care of a lot of that for you. So the way this works is we're going to say where it equals a question mark. And then we're going to tell this PDO class to bind the user input to the SQL statement, and then it will actually do the replacing and to insert where this question mark is. So we don't have to do that. Okay, so let's go ahead and save this. And then before we execute this thing, so we're going to do that same check again. So I'm actually just going to copy this. So we need to bind that user input to this statement. And so I'm just going to check to say, hey, if there was search, then I'm going to assume they're searching for the email, and then we'll kind of take that user input and bind it to this question mark. So the way this looks is we'll say statement arrow, and there's another method called bind param. And this takes two arguments. So the first is which question mark, because a SQL statement could actually have multiple like of these question marks, and I'm going to say the first one. So right now our SQL statement only has one. So I'm saying let's get the first one. And then the value that I want bound to that question mark is this $_get search. So I'm going to copy this and just paste that there. So this is only going to happen if the search, if there's that search query string parameter. Yes.
Sorry, I might have missed it, but what is the one?
Yeah, yeah. So the one means the first question mark. So if the SQL statement had like 2 question marks, I could bind multiple params and it would be 1 and then 2.
How does it exactly like prevent from SQL injection? Can someone still just put something in there, or is it?
In here,
Or like yeah,
like
like if we were just doing like the plain like the other version, it would sort of be similar. If we were just like where customers email and then directly put the get search.
yeah, actually, here another class I kind of went over this. Let me pull it up because it's actually kind of interesting. Let's see, where's my school stuff? Here's like a fictitious example I made up for another class. So you can imagine like a login form, and you collect like a username and password, and so you connect to a database. And this would be like maybe the non-PDO prepared statement approach. So we're just kind of manually concatenating these things. So you can imagine if somebody manipulated this and they said they set the password equal to quote or quote quote equals quote. And so it's like, I mean, it's pretty crafty, right? But what ends up happening is saying, like the SQL statement that's getting generated is select all from users where username is equal to this and password is equal to an empty string or empty string equals empty string, which ends up being true, right? So then this thing would, like, you could bypass the login. Most databases, and like I think this one would probably still fail just because I think MySQL, I forget exactly, but I think I tried this once, and I think even like I'm not sure if it was like PHP or MySQL that kind of protected against this or did something, but like this is essentially like what's going on with behind SQL injection attacks. So they get really crafty in terms of like what they type in, just having some knowledge of SQL, putting it into a like an input, and especially if it's like an old website, you know that website hasn't been updated in a long time, and so you can imagine like, oh, it could be written by in PHP, especially if you look at like the URL and you see .php and it's old, like it could be running on some really old just code and it's never updated, and then you could like, you know, try it and see if it works.
Okay. So like, because otherwise you have all these like little quotes in there and then the question mark is.
Yeah, you're like altering the SQL statement before execution, so it's not like the intended SQL statement that got executed. Yeah, but then like PDO prevents a lot of this, so I've never heard of like a SQL injection attack like of ones when like libraries like this and stuff are used. That's also kind of why like I think, you know, PHP sometimes gets a bad name because it's like, oh, it's insecure. Well, like it can be, but it doesn't have to be. But you know, it's also easy too, right? Because everybody, if you get started writing a basic dynamic web page and you kind of learn this approach, and it's obviously not secure, but you kind of get something going. So yeah. Okay, so let's go ahead and try this out. So I'll pick one of these emails. Let me pick one down here. And we can see that it just filtered on the email. And so even if I refresh this page, you can see that it's the same thing because this is being preserved in the query string. So I could take this URL, share it with somebody, and they would get the same set of results because what I typed into the input was preserved through the query string, and that's kind of being run on the page. Okay, so let's make this a little bit more robust. Let's add a little, well, let's pre-populate the input with the search term. So I'm going to go down to this input, and I'm going to say value is equal to, and I'm going to break this input onto a couple of lines here. So here I'm going to say PHP, and I'll say is set. So if that $_get search has been set, we're going to use what's called a ternary statement, and it's kind of like a shorthand if. And so this is great for like one-liners, but I can say this is the first part of the if. So I say, what's the condition? So this is the condition, question mark, and then I want to say I want to spit out get search. Otherwise, I'll just say an empty string. And then make sure you put like an echo in front of this is set. So I want to echo out if this is set. So if that's true, I'm going to echo this thing out. Otherwise, it'll just empty out, echo out like an empty string. Yeah, so this is like a shorthand if. Yeah, let's see. Yeah, so it's called the ternary operator. So shorthand if. Okay, so if I refresh, I can see that the email is now preserved in the input. So cool. Okay, so let's also add a clear, so that if I want to just see everything again, we'll just add another button. And so right underneath the submit button, this actually could just be a regular link. So it's just going to link back to index.php, and I can just say clear. So I'm essentially by changing saying that the anchor's URL does not include the query string, it'll go away. And then we can just add some Bootstrap classes on here. We'll say btn and btn default, and this will just make it look a little nicer. So we can refresh. Whoops. If I hit clear, it just kind of redirects me back to the main page without the query string, so then I see all records again. So again, a little bit better. So right now, if I kind of just type in some garbage, nothing comes back. So let's make it so that if there are no results, let's just say something in the table like no invoices found. So after the for each, so I'm going to say if the count of invoices is equal to 0, and this is going to work kind of like this for each statement where we kind of start it and then we say we're temporarily ending, so we're closing the PHP block, so we use that colon, and then we can close the if statement by saying end if, and then this way we can kind of put some HTML inside of here. And then I'm going to have a tr, so don't, then a td, and I'll say no invoices found. All right, so if you go back, refresh, you can see it says no invoices found. This is only in the first cell, so to make this span all the way across. Does anyone know that HTML attribute? Yeah, call span. So you can go on this TD and we'll say call span is equal to, let's see, I have 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's 4 columns. And then this should fix this like broken looking table. Yeah. Okay, so just to review, we did a SQL statement. We had some joins in there to kind of link up multiple tables. And then we also conditionally modified this SQL statement based on if there was a search query string parameter, which came from the form. And if so, then we bound that value to the prepared statement so that, to prevent against SQL injection attacks. We executed it. We got back an array of objects, and we looped over it with the for each. And so each one was stored in this invoice variable, and then we can point to each object's properties through the arrow syntax, and then all the columns became properties on each object, and then we just kind of displayed them. So when I actually did this yesterday, I did something a little bit different. So if you want to take a look, we won't do this in class, but I actually did a search against customer first name and last name. I was short on time, so I did email today. But it became, I did it so that you could type into the search box and it would search against the first name and last name of the customer. So what that kind of looked like was similar deal to what we did today. I just said I used a like statement instead of equals. So like question mark, and then kind of down here, I said if the search term was either in the first name or the last name, then we bound those params. So we did bind param 1 and 2 because there's 2 question marks in this SQL statement now. And I just took that same bound param, which was the search term, add the 2 percent signs, which comes from the like statement. So in SQL, you can do like if I did select all from customers where first name like percent. Let's do something like common percent AN percent. Oh wait. All right, let me reduce the number of columns here. Am I doing some?
I think the limit 3s should be outside the quotes.
Oh, wait, where first name like?
Like the quote should come after the percent.
Oh, whoops. Yeah, thanks. There we go. Thank you. Okay, so yeah, so that's like a like statement if you forgot, or so the percent signs are like wildcards, so it'll just search for first names that just contain a. So I could also do the same thing and say like, as long as there's anything, whether it doesn't matter what's before it or what's after it, as long as it contains an. That's kind of what these percents are. Now you can do it where it's like as long as if you wanted to, you could say like %an, and so it could start with anything as long as it ends in an, or you could do the opposite and say it starts with an but ends with anything else. But generally, I'd say a lot of cases it's kind of this, where you just, as long as it contains an. So yeah, so that was the example I did kind of yesterday, but so you can kind of get an idea of like this bind param thing. The number corresponds to the order of the question mark. So this is 1, this is 2, and that's essentially what I was binding, the percents and then the value. So any questions? Okay, so hopefully some of that should be reviewed. There might be a few new things, like probably the PDO is new, and then the maybe a few functions, or like the shorthand for each and if statements. Maybe you didn't see that, but overall, hopefully a good chunk of this was review. For the assignment, so you're gonna have a page that lists a bunch of genres. And then, so you're going to list out all the genres, and then each genre is going to have a link next to it that says tracks, and then that'll take you to all the tracks for that genre. And so you're going to have 2 pages. So one's the genres, you link to the tracks for that genre, and then on that tracks page, you're going to display the track name, album title, artist name, and then the price. So this SQL query we kind of did today when we just were playing inside just SQLite directly. Oh, deploy. I forgot to do this. Okay, we got to deploy. Okay, so as the assignment, you'll also deploy it to Heroku. Yes.
Should we create our own repository?
Yeah, for the assignment?
Yeah.
Yeah. So for the assignment, you'll create a repository called ITP405-assignment1. Like, name it exactly that. Yeah. And so you'll submit a URL for both the Heroku URL and then the GitHub URL. So there's 2. But yes, let's deploy this, and then this way, you have a link. We have a link to like click on and stuff and view it. Okay, so let me close some of this. Okay, so go to Heroku.com, log in. All right, let me delete one of my apps so that I can make room for this one. Okay, so once you does someone have a question? Once you're you've logged in, click on New, and then Create New App, and give this a name. So do something probably with your username or make it unique. But I'll call mine. Let's see, we'll call this Week 2 Invoices Detang. So I'll say Create App. And then down here, it's going to give you some instructions. So I already had you download that Heroku CLI. So hopefully you downloaded that and you saw that chat in the Slack. But from the command line, I'm going to stop this. You'll want to run Heroku login, and it's going to ask you for your credentials. So just kind of type those in. It'll get saved, so you don't have to type this in again. So I already did this at one point. I forgot my password. That's why I don't want to do it again, because I don't have to like look that up and everything. But yeah, go ahead and type in Heroku login. You'll get logged in.
Can we do that in terminal?
Yes. Okay, so there's one thing that we have to do to get this to work. By default, Heroku is not going to install the SQLite extension for PHP. So we have what we have to do is we're going to create a new file, and we're going to call this composer.json. And we'll get into this more next week, but PHP has a package manager called Composer. And if you've done Node, it's kind of like NPM. And so this is like a configuration file, so we can list out packages and stuff. But Heroku will expect, in order to get this, in order for it to install the PHP SQLite extensions, because we're pushing up this Chinook database, which is a SQLite database, we need to add this key in here into this composer JSON. So we're going to say require, and it's ext-pdo underscore SQLite :*. So I think there's just a package called this, and we're just asking for any version of it. I think I found this in the Heroku doc somewhere. So this will install SQLite extension for PHP. Okay, so we need to actually install this package. So we actually need to install Composer, and Composer is like a PHP executable. So if I go to just type in Composer on Google, and they have a download button. So I'll paste this into the Slack. So it's in that class demos channel. And you just want to copy out all these commands. And I'm just going to paste this here. And so at that point, you'll have this composer.far file. And far stands for PHP archive. But the way we can actually run this is we can say php.composer.far. So we're kind of we're executing it with PHP. If I type it in, it's going to just give us a bunch of options. So it'll say like, here's a bunch of commands. And so what I want to do is I'm going to say php space composer.far install, and this will look at that composer.json file. So this is what I ran. This will look at that composer.json file and then install the necessary packages. So now if I look at this, you're going to see it created this thing called a lock file and this vendor folder with the stuff in it that it needs. And that's all we need to do, at least, to get this Composer thing going. We're going to be using Composer actually a lot more even when we get into Laravel, because pretty much every technology has some type of package manager for downloading like external libraries and stuff. So PHP's is Composer, Node is for NPM if you've worked with Node. Pretty much every technology has one. So yep.
What's the what was the command that installed it?
I just copied it from this site. I just copied these and ran these. Yeah, so I put a link to it in the Slack. So this will create some files. Now we can push it up. That was just to get SQLite working on Heroku. Composer JSON.
Yeah.
Let me paste this in just in the Slack in case maybe I had a typo or something.
Does Composer need to be installed to that specific
Folder.
Yeah.
If you already have it like globally installed, that's cool. I just didn't want to get into all that.
I didn't see the class button chat.
The what? Oh yeah, click on this plus sign, I think. Or no, let's see. Click on the word channels. Okay, so now we can run, so to deploy our application, we're just going to follow these instructions. So we're going to say git add, git commit, git push Heroku master, and this will push it up to Heroku, and they'll run this for us. So I'll just kind of run these commands. So I'll go here and say, so I didn't initialize a git repository in this folder, so I got to say git init. So we initialize git, then I'll say git add period. So that means add all the files. So if I typed in git status, it's saying, okay, here's what I'm about to commit. Now I actually don't even need to commit these vendor files. We can like ignore those because those get just auto downloaded. So like as a good practice, you'll often see in projects a file called .gitignore, and then things that you can ignore from your project like node modules if you've worked in Node, or just vendor for PHP. So I can just say vendor, and let me so I'll just do reset. So git reset, and I'll say git add period, and then git status. So now it's saying, okay, I'm only adding the specific file, so I don't care about like the vendor folder. So that generally this is like probably good practice. You actually don't even need the composer. So probably something else you'd probably want to put in here is composer.far. And so let me undo this. I'm going to say git reset. And then if I do git add period, and then git status, we can see, okay, what we're going to commit is just the essentials. So the database, the composer JSON and lock file, and the index PHP. This SQL text doesn't really matter. That was just some notes for you. You can commit that stuff up if you'd like, but just as a general good practice, you'll see this a lot. Okay, so I added this. So I'll say git commit -m. I'll say let's see, finished my invoices page. Now I need to link my local repository with the Heroku one, so we need to actually run this command, Heroku git. And so this Heroku command comes from that Heroku CLI that you guys all installed. So I'll copy this and paste this here. And so this will link it to that app I just created on Heroku. Now I can say git push Heroku master. And so this is pushing it up, and you can see it starting to run a bunch of things. And then it says verifying deploy, done. So you can actually just take this let's see, where's the URL? Here's the URL. Deployed to Heroku. You can also go into this open app. We'll click on open app, and it's there. You'll kind of get used to that Heroku process just a little bit because we're going to be doing it over and over. So it was a little confusing just because we also had to install Composer, which I'll get into probably a little bit more next week. I forgot about that. But that was all just so we can get SQLite running on Heroku. So now we actually have a public URL that we can share. And just you can check out like the Heroku dashboard, and you can see like activity, and you can see like when the last deploy was and stuff. And so it's really handy. So if you've ever done like PHP files and you just drag them via FTP to a server and then check there, like, it's cool. But, this way you have a little bit more control because you're doing it all like command line, and it has a bunch of like status stuff in the dashboard and a lot of good stuff in Heroku. There's actually stuff in here, we can get to this later, but like you can connect it to GitHub. And then this way, every time you push it up to GitHub, it automatically deploys it too. All you actually really have to do is click on this button, but you guys can try it. Okay, so as like for your assignment, you'll submit this as one of your URLs, and then you'll also push this up to GitHub and then send that URL as well. So 2 URLs. This way I have a live version and the code that we can just look at through GitHub, and all is good. So let me actually push this up to my GitHub, and so here's the link to class demos. If you just click this, I'll post kind of all stuff up here. And the one suffix with dash class will be the ones I did in class. The dash prep ones are just the ones I did at home the day before. So week 2 PDO class. Okay, so the code's there. If you want to like pull it down or just look at it, you can. And let me go back to the assignment. So anyone have questions on this? Stick around in lab and you can, at least get started. And if this was kind of like your first intro to OOP or object-oriented programming, yeah, please read like chapters 1 and 2 in the blog. The blog is maybe a little bit more concise because this is a little bit longer, but it's explained very well. Cool. With that, I guess next week we will start with MVC using Laravel, and yeah, have a good week.